The year was 1880, and the wind, sharp as a new knife, swept through the small Colorado town of Havenwood. Alara knew the wind well. It carried whispers, and lately, those whispers were all about her. She was a young woman, barely past her 20th year. But in Havenwood, that meant she should already have a babe in her arms, or at least one on the way. Her arms, however, remained empty. Alara loved children. She often watched the town's little ones play, their laughter like bells in the dusty streets. She imagined holding her own, rocking a tiny bundle, singing lullabies as the sun dipped behind the jagged peaks. But the months, then years, rolled by like tumbleweeds across the prairie, and no child came. The women of Havenwood, once her friends, now looked at her with pity, then with something colder. Their smiles grew thin, their greetings short. It wasn't just about love or family. It was about the future of their tiny settlement. Every child born was another pair of hands for the farms, another soul to carry on their traditions in this harsh, beautiful land. Alara felt the weight of their expectations pressing down on her, heavier than any rock. Her own mother, her face etched with worry lines, would sometimes touch Alara's hand, her gaze filled with unspoken sorrow. "God's will, my dear," she'd murmur, but even her voice held a hint of resignation. Alara tried everything: special teas, old wives' tales, endless prayers whispered into the vast, star-filled nights. Nothing worked. The empty cradle in her small cabin felt like a constant reminder of her failure. The whispers grew louder, turning from pity to judgment, slowly but surely, hardening the hearts of those around her. The whispers, once soft as falling snow, had turned into a biting wind. Years had passed, 5 in total, since Alara had wed. 5 years of hoping, 5 years of empty arms. The older women, those who held sway in Havenwood, began to eye her with something more than just pity. It was suspicion, cold and sharp. At the Sunday gathering, a time usually filled with shared bread and warm laughter, Alara found herself alone. The other wives clustered together, their backs turned, their voices dropping to hushed tones when she passed. Even the children, usually so quick to run to her for a sweet or a kind word, now clung to their mother's skirts, peering at Alara with wide, uncertain eyes. Martha, the oldest woman in town and a self-appointed keeper of Havenwood's traditions, often cleared her throat loudly when Alara was near. "A woman's purpose is to bring forth life," Martha had declared one afternoon, her gaze fixed directly on Alara. "Else she is but a drain on the community." The words cut deeper than any blade. Alara tried to ignore them, to busy her hands with chores, to pretend she didn't see the way doors closed a little faster when she approached. But the chill seeped into her bones. She would walk to the general store, only to find the proprietor suddenly busy with another customer, leaving her to wait, unheard and unseen. At the town well, women would fill their buckets and leave, rather than stand beside her. The simple acts of daily life became a torment, each interaction a fresh reminder of her growing isolation. She was still in Havenwood, but she was no longer truly a part of it. The warmth of belonging had vanished, replaced by a deep, aching cold. The day arrived with a sky as gray and heavy as the hearts of those gathered. It was not a storm brewing, but a judgment. Alara stood before the town square, the familiar faces of her neighbors, now masks of stern resolve. Martha, the elder woman, stepped forward, her eyes hard as river stones. Beside her, a man held a branding iron, its tip glowing faintly from a small fire. A gasp caught in Alara's throat, but no sound escaped. This couldn't be happening. Not here, not in the town she had called home since birth. But the cold silence of the crowd, the way her own mother wept silently in the back, told her it was real. "Alara, for your failure to bear fruit, for your barrenness, which saps the strength of this community, you are cast out." Martha's voice boomed, chilling the air more than the winter wind. "You shall bear this mark as a reminder of your transgression and as a warning to all." Strong hands seized Alara, pushing her arm forward. She cried out then, a raw sound of pain and disbelief as the hot iron seared her skin. The smell of burning flesh filled the air, and a sharp, blinding pain shot through her. A symbol, crude and cruel, was burned onto her forearm. A barren tree, leafless and twisted. When it was done, they let her go, leaving her swaying, her arm throbbing, her spirit shattered. "Leave Havenwood," Martha commanded, her voice softened by no mercy. "Go and never return. You are no longer one of us." Alara stumbled, clutching her seared arm, the pain a searing reminder of their rejection. With nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart full of ash, she turned away from the only home she had ever known, the cold wind her only companion. The familiar path that led away from Havenwood stretched before Alara, now a road to nowhere. Each step was agony, not just from the throbbing burn on her arm, but from the searing pain in her chest. She clutched the rough fabric of her sleeve over the fresh wound, trying to hide the ugly mark, as if shielding it would somehow erase its meaning. The sun, usually a comforting presence in the wide Colorado sky, felt indifferent, watching her struggle. Days blurred into a weary cycle of walking, resting, and trying to find scraps of food. The landscape was vast and unforgiving, a stark mirror to her own emptiness. Canyons yawned like open wounds, mountains loomed with silent judgment, and the endless plains offered no shelter. She passed small, isolated cabins, but fear kept her away. What if they saw her mark? What if they knew? The shame was a heavy cloak, wrapping around her, suffocating her hope. She slept under the cold stars, listening to the lonely cries of coyotes, feeling utterly insignificant in the immense wilderness. Her meager bundle held little comfort, just a thin blanket and a piece of dried jerky she'd managed to trade for. Each morning she would pull her sleeve down carefully, making sure no one, not even the curious eyes of a passing squirrel, would glimpse the brand. The barren tree, a symbol of her supposed failure, seemed to deepen its roots into her very soul. She was a ghost, wandering through a world that had no place for her, her heart a raw, bleeding wound, her future as empty as her arms. Lost. That was the only word that truly fit. Utterly, terribly lost. One afternoon, as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in fiery oranges and deep purples, Ilara's weary legs nearly gave out. She was tired, hungry, and her arm ached with a dull, persistent throb. Just as she thought she could go no further, a wisp of smoke curled upwards in the distance. Hope, a feeling she hadn't known in days, flickered faintly within her. She pushed on, one foot in front of the other, until a small, ramshackle ranch slowly came into view. It was modest, with a sturdy but weathered cabin, a small barn, and a corral holding a few horses. 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, were chasing chickens in the yard, their high-pitched squeals mixing with the clucking of the birds. A man emerged from the barn, tall and broad-shouldered, but with a weary slump to his posture. His hair was streaked with gray at the temples, and lines of worry creased his eyes, yet they held a spark of kindness. He watched the children with a fond, tired gaze. This was William, a rancher who, Ilara would soon learn, had lost his wife a year ago and was trying his best to raise his little ones alone. Ilara hesitated at the edge of the property, a stranger, scarred and fearful. The man spotted her, his brow furrowing slightly, but there was no immediate alarm, only a quiet curiosity. One of the children, a tiny girl with braids bouncing, spotted Ilara too and pointed. "Papa, look!" she chirped. The man, William, turned his full attention to Ilara, his expression a mix of caution and something else she couldn't quite name. It wasn't the cold judgment she expected, but a weariness that seemed to match her own. William approached Ilara slowly, his eyes taking in her dusty clothes, the way she clutched her arm, and the deep fatigue etched on her face. He saw not a threat, but a soul in desperate need. He knew that look well. He saw it in the mirror sometimes. "Evening, ma'am," he said, his voice rough but gentle. You look like you've been traveling a long way. Are you lost? Alara could only nod, her voice caught in her throat. She expected questions, demands, or worse, the cold stare of judgment. Instead, William simply gestured towards his cabin. We've got a warm fire and some stew on. You're welcome to share it, and a place to rest your head for the night if you need it. He didn't ask her name or where she came from. He just saw her exhaustion, her silent plea. It was a simple offer, but to Alara, it felt like a lifeline thrown into a churning sea. She managed a weak, "Thank you." Her eyes welling with tears, she quickly blinked away. Inside the small, cozy cabin, the scent of simmering stew filled the air. The three children, Lily, Thomas, and little Ben, stared at her with wide, curious eyes. William introduced them simply. These are my little ones, Lily, Thomas, Ben. Then he turned to her. And I'm William. What's your name, ma'am? Alara, she whispered, still keeping her branded arm carefully hidden beneath her sleeve. Well, Alara, you look like you could use a good meal and some rest, William said, pushing a chair towards the table. I could use some help around here with the ranch and the children. If you're looking for work, there's always plenty to do. It was more than an offer of charity. It was an offer of purpose, of belonging, however temporary. Alara felt a fragile seed of hope begin to sprout in her barren heart. Life at William's ranch quickly fell into a rhythm. Alara rose before dawn, helping with the morning chores, milking the cow, and gathering eggs. She cooked, cleaned, and mended clothes with practiced hands. The work was hard, but it was honest, and for the first time in a long while, Alara felt useful. With each task completed, a tiny piece of her shattered spirit seemed to mend. The children, Lily, Thomas, and little Ben, were lively and full of questions. Alara found herself teaching Lily how to braid her hair, helping Thomas with his sums, and playing peekaboo with Ben. Their innocent joy was a balm to her wounded heart. She would read them stories by the firelight, her voice a soft hum, and their small, warm bodies would lean against her. But always, always, she kept her left forearm covered. No matter how hot the day, no matter how much her other arm ached from work, the long sleeves of her dresses or a carefully wrapped cloth stayed in place. When she bathed, she did so in private quickly. When she slept, she curled in a way that shielded the scarred skin. The fear of discovery was a constant shadow. What if William saw it? What if the children saw it? Would their smiles fade? Would their warm hugs turn cold? She imagined the look of disgust, the questions, the eventual rejection. The thought was a bitter taste in her mouth. She had found a fragile peace, a sense of belonging she hadn't dared to dream of, and she would do anything to protect it. This new purpose, this precious glimmer of happiness, felt too delicate to risk. The scar was her secret, her shame, and she intended to keep it that way. One sunny afternoon, Alara was in the garden, showing Lily how to plant beans. Little Ben, usually trailing behind Thomas, toddled over, his face sticky with jam. He tugged at her skirt, looking up at her with wide, trusting eyes. "Mama," he mumbled, holding up his hands for her to pick him up. The word hit Alara like a sudden, gentle blow. Her breath caught. Mama, a word she had longed to hear, a title she had been denied, a dream she had buried deep. She scooped Ben into her arms, hugging him tight, his small head resting against her shoulder. A wave of warmth spread through her, quickly followed by a pang of sharp, familiar sorrow. She was not their mama. Not truly. The barren tree on her arm felt like a phantom ache. A few days later, Thomas, after skinning his knee falling from a fence, ran crying to her. "Mama! My knee hurts," he wailed, burying his face in her apron. Alara knelt, stroking his hair, comforting him with soft words and a gentle touch, just as a mother would. She cleaned his wound, and soon he was smiling again. Lily, the oldest, began to use the word more deliberately. "Mama, can you read me a story tonight?" Or, "Mama, where did Papa put my doll?" Each time the word brought a mix of incredible joy and a quiet, heartbreaking pain. It was everything she had ever wanted, given to her by these innocent children. Yet it was also a cruel reminder of what she was supposedly not. She never corrected them. How could she? Their love was a precious, unexpected gift, blooming in the desert of her heart. She held on to it tightly, even as it made her long for what she believed she could never truly be. William was a man of few words, but he was a keen observer. He saw the way Alara's eyes softened when little Ben whispered "Mama," the way she patiently untangled Lily's braids, and how she listened with genuine interest to Thomas's tales of imaginary adventures. He noticed the gentle way she stroked a stray cat or hummed a lullaby while mending a torn shirt. He also saw the quiet sadness that never quite left her eyes, even when she smiled. It was a deep, lingering shadow, like the last rays of sun fading behind a mountain. He noticed how she always wore long sleeves, even on the warmest days, and the subtle way she always kept her left arm slightly turned away from him. He respected her privacy, but his curiosity grew, mixed with a growing sense of concern. One evening, after the children were asleep, William sat on the porch, watching the stars blaze in the inky sky. Alara came out, carrying 2 cups of steaming tea. She handed him one, her fingers brushing his, and he felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the tea. "They're good children, William," she said softly, gazing at the cabin windows. "They are," he agreed. "And you're good with them, Alara." "Better than I could hope for." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You carry a burden, I can see it. Something heavy." Alara stiffened, her gaze dropping to her hands. "We all have our burdens, William," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. She did not elaborate, and William, sensing her retreat, did not press. But he understood that her sadness was not just a quiet sorrow. It was a carefully guarded secret, one that held her just out of reach, but also made him want to understand her all the more. His respect for her deepened, blooming into a tenderness he hadn't felt since his wife passed. The serene calm of the ranch was shattered one chilly autumn evening. Little Ben, who had been coughing all day, suddenly grew hot with fever. His breathing became shallow and ragged, each gasp a jagged tear in Alara's heart. William, pale with worry, sent Thomas to fetch their nearest neighbor, a good hour's ride away, for help. As the hours dragged on, Ben worsened. Alara worked tirelessly, dampening cloths for his forehead, trying to coax sips of water into his parched mouth. William sat beside her, his hand resting on his son's brow, his face a mask of fear. In her haste to tend to the feverish boy, Alara had rolled up her sleeves, forgetting her usual careful cover. The rough fabric of her dress caught on something, and with a soft ripping sound, the sleeve tore, exposing her left forearm. William looked up, his eyes heavy with sleep and worry, and his gaze fell upon the angry, twisted symbol burned into her skin. The barren tree. Alara froze, her breath catching. Her heart pounded, a frantic bird trapped in her chest. All the old fears rushed back, cold and sharp. This was it, the moment she had dreaded. He would see, he would know, and he would send her away. She tried to pull her sleeve down, but William's hand gently stopped her. He looked at the scar, then at her face, his eyes searching. "Alara," he murmured, his voice soft, full of question, but no judgment. Just a profound, quiet understanding. The cabin was silent except for Ben's struggling breaths and the crackle of the fire. In that moment of shared fear and exposed truth, the walls Alara had built around her heart began to tremble. William's gentle touch on her arm was not one of disgust, but of reassurance. He looked at the barren tree, then back at her eyes, which were filled with a lifetime of pain and fear. "What did they do to you, Alara?" he asked, his voice low and heavy with sorrow, not condemnation. Tears, long held back, finally spilled down Alara's cheeks. She told him everything then, her voice trembling, the years of whispers, the coldness, the cruel branding, the exile for failing to bear children. William listened, his face grim, his hand never leaving her arm. When she finished, he simply wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight, a silent promise of protection and acceptance. Later that morning, as little Ben began to slowly recover, Lily and Thomas came into the room. They saw Alara's exposed arm, the mark clear for all to see. Alara braced herself for their reactions, expecting fear or questions that would lead to rejection. But Lily, her brow furrowed in concern, simply reached out a small finger and traced the outline of the scar. "Did that hurt, Mama?" she asked, her voice soft. Thomas, ever practical, chimed in. "It looks like a twiggy tree." "Why is it there, Mama?" Alara looked at William, who nodded, giving her strength. "It's a mark from a place where people were unkind," she explained gently, "because I couldn't have children of my own." Lily frowned. "But you're our Mama," she declared, then climbed onto Alara's lap, wrapping her arms around her neck. Thomas leaned against her, and even weak Ben reached out a tiny hand. There was no fear, no disgust, only their pure, uncomplicated love. In their innocent embrace, Alara felt a deep, healing warmth spread through her. It was a love that saw past the scar, past the shame, and embraced her fully, completely. The days that followed Ben's recovery were different. The fear that had always clung to Alara, the shame that had made her hide, began to loosen its grip. The children's unwavering love, their simple acceptance of her, scar and all, was a powerful medicine. When Lily drew a picture of their family, she drew Alara in the middle, holding hands with William and 3 happy children around them. There was no barren tree, only sunshine and flowers. William, too, treated her no differently. In fact, there was a new depth to his gaze, a quiet understanding that warmed her more than any fire. He never mentioned the scar again, but his actions spoke volumes. He would sometimes reach out and gently touch her arm, a comforting gesture that acknowledged her pain without dwelling on it. Alara looked around the small, bustling cabin, filled with the scent of wood smoke and baking bread, the sound of children's chatter, and William's steady presence. This wasn't the family she had been born into, nor the one she had hoped to create in Havenwood. This was something different, something profound. It was a family chosen not by blood, but by kindness, by need, and by a love that grew from shared burdens and quiet understanding. The barren tree on her arm still marked her, but it no longer defined her. It was a part of her story, yes, but not the end of it. Here, with William and his children, she was not barren. She was loved. She was needed. She was Mama. Her heart, once a landscape of ash and desolation, now bloomed with a vibrant, unexpected garden. This new family, so unexpected, was a gift, healing wounds she thought would never close. It was a testament that family wasn't just found. Sometimes it was made. William watched Alara one evening as she tucked Lily into bed, humming a sweet tune. He saw the love in her eyes, the gentle way she smoothed Lily's hair. He had felt it too, that deep, quiet love for her, growing steadily like the strong oak outside his cabin. He remembered the barren tree on her arm, and a fierce protectiveness swelled in his chest. This woman, so unfairly judged, was more of a mother than any he had ever known. He thought of his children, how they had blossomed under her care, how they called her Mama with such natural affection. He thought of his own lonely evenings before she arrived, the quiet ache in his heart for a partner, a companion, a wife. Alara filled that emptiness, not just for the children, but for him. Later, as the fire dwindled to embers, William found Alara sitting on the porch, gazing at the stars. He sat beside her, the familiar comfort of her presence settling over him. "Alara," he began, his voice a little rough with emotion. "This ranch, this family, it's become home to you, hasn't it?" She turned to him, her eyes soft in the dim light. "More than I ever dared to dream, William." "And you've become home to us," he continued, taking her hand. He didn't flinch from her scarred arm, but held it gently. "The children, they call you Mama. And I I see you as more than just a helper, Alara. I see you as family. My family. He took a deep breath. Will you be my wife, Alara? Will you be our children's mother truly in every way that matters? Alara's heart swelled, tears blurring the starlight. This was not pity, not obligation, but a pure, honest proposal of love and family. It was everything she had been denied, offered freely, without judgment. Yes, William, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Yes, I will. The decision made, a quiet joy settled over the ranch. William wanted to make their union official, not just for them, but for the children, and for the world to see. He knew what kind of gossip traveled in these parts, how quickly judgment could spread, but he didn't care. He was proud of Alara, and he wanted everyone to know it. The nearest town with a circuit preacher was Harmony Creek, a small cluster of buildings not unlike Havenwood, the very kind of place that had once cast Alara out. A knot of old fear tightened in Alara's stomach as they prepared for the journey. She had found acceptance and love, but the scars of her past, both seen and unseen, were still raw. Are you ready, Alara? William asked gently, as he helped her onto the wagon seat, the children already chattering excitedly in the back. She took a deep breath, looking at his kind, steady face. As I'll ever be, she replied, a faint tremor in her voice. The ride to Harmony Creek was filled with sunshine and the children's joyful songs, but Alara's gaze kept falling to her left arm, covered as always by her sleeve. She knew William had accepted her, and the children adored her, but the thought of facing a new set of strangers, of their inevitable stares and whispers if they saw the mark, was daunting. It was one thing to be loved in the quiet solitude of their ranch. It was another to stand exposed in a town square. William, sensing her quiet apprehension, reached across and squeezed her hand, a silent message of strength and support. His touch was a comforting anchor, pulling her back from the edge of her fears. She was not alone this time. She had a family, and they were riding into this together. The small square in Harmony Creek was bustling. Farmers bartered goods, children chased stray dogs, and women exchanged pleasantries outside the general store. As William pulled the wagon to a stop, Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. She kept her gaze fixed straight ahead, acutely aware of the curious glances cast their way. The familiar fear of judgment, the ghost of Havenwood, lingered at the edges of her mind. William helped her down, his hand warm and solid in hers. He then gathered the children, who stood shyly beside them. A few townsfolk, recognizing William from his occasional visits, nodded in greeting. Then, the circuit preacher, a kindly-looking man with a long beard, emerged from the store. William stepped forward, pulling Alara gently with him, turning to face the small crowd that had begun to gather. He looked at Alara, his eyes shining with a deep, unwavering love. "Friends, neighbors," William's voice rang out, clear and strong, cutting through the square's everyday sounds. "I've brought Alara here today to make an announcement." He paused, taking Alara's left hand in his. With a deliberate, tender movement, he pushed up her sleeve, revealing the stark, indelible mark of the barren tree. A gasp rippled through the small assembly. Whispers, like the ones that had haunted Alara for years, began to rise. Alara flinched, her eyes darting to the faces around her, bracing for the disgust, the condemnation. But then, William tightened his grip on her scarred hand, drawing her gaze back to his. He looked her straight in the eyes, a challenge and a promise in his gaze, and then he looked out at the townspeople, his voice booming with pride. "This woman, Alara, has a past that some might judge, but I see her true heart, her kindness, her strength. She is a mother to my children, and she is the light of my life." He squeezed her hand once more, lifting it slightly for all to see. "Before God and all of you, I proudly stand here to say, this is my wife, Alara." The whispers died down, replaced by a stunned silence, then a few murmurs of quiet respect. Alara felt a warmth spread through her, stronger than any shame. William's love had not just accepted her scar, it had transformed it into a symbol of her resilience, her survival. She looked at William, then at her children, who were beaming up at them. She was home. She was truly free.